Me too. I don't.
Go on, just for the recording. Tell us what you were going to say.
I was just gonna say I can never find it when it's in the cloud either, or maybe I've never even tried to look for it in the cloud.
Yeah, that's another thing. They get buried somewhere in Google Drive. I'm not sure exactly where. So this is just easier. Okay, Kushal is out, so Donald and I are your hosts today. Let's see where we're at. So I think the first comment we have that isn't a status update is from Mario. So Mario, do you want to take it away? You're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that this is just a technical question, I guess. I was thinking about the when we get to the backfilling, and I know we're not supposed to add more columns to the issues table, but I was wondering if it will be easier to actually add an Epic ID column to the issues table versus adding a work item ID to the Epics table, just because of how the backfill will work. And we will be inserting multiple columns in batches to the issues table, and we could just add the Epic ID in that insert versus creating the records and then having to update the Epics table with the new IDs. Not sure if we have thought of this.
Uh, uh, so we could do this way, but I was thinking if we should keep the work item ID in the Epic table, because when you're going to do the update sync and we update the legacy Epic, we need a way to find the work item anyway. So this is something that we need anyway to keep things in sync. So we could do in the other way if we have any benefit. We could do the two, but it seems like it's just we would double the work. Uh, uh, was I clear enough about this? About why we need this on the Epic table?
Okay, I think this is something we can discuss later or when we get to implementing. Not, I mean, we don't need to do it sync here. Just wanted
Yeah,
to
for the
keep that in
backfilling,
mind.
one other thing is that I'm not sure you can do them bulk inserts because you need the ID back to copy it into the epics table. So I'm not sure you can do bulks, but again, there are not so many epics, so maybe it's okay. I don't know. That's a technical thing that would need to look into.
Yep, can do it offline.
Can I ask about this because it's in decisions made? It says backfill global ID of Epic work items. What does that mean, backfill? Does that mean that we wouldn't change the IID of existing legacy objects? Does it mean
Right.
to,
That's when the backfilling is happening. Yeah. So or when you create, so we want to do the syncing mechanism, right? So when you create a work item for the respective legacy epic, you want to store both global IDs. Like you want to already create the mapping between these two, because otherwise, what the way that you would map it to is you'd have to query by the same IID and the group pair, right? You need to keep the pair in order to identify the work item clone for the epic, right? So there are two ways to do it: the IID and namespace pair, or just store the actual global ID so that you have the direct mapping between the two IDs.
and the decision was to store the global IID.
Yeah, I think we should do that because it's cheap to implement, and it may turn to be very useful to use in the APIs that do use global IDs rather than the IIDs. Does that clarify it?
Sort of. I mean, is the alternative like, is the decision between copying it to copying the global ID or retaining the original epic with the IID? Is that the decision? Because I thought where we left it this morning was we were going to
No.
keep the object with the.
No, it's two separate things. We will
Okay.
retain the IID, but also have a mapping between the global IDs as well. So, and again, that's because otherwise, like, imagine there are APIs, for instance, that use epic global ID to identify the epic, right? So if we don't store the global IID mapping, what you'll need to do is identify the epic, fetch its IID, go and find the corresponding issue for that IID and namespace, and then do work with that. Whereas in this other case, you have the global ID and you already know the issues basically ID, so you can fetch it a bit faster, basically.
Okay, got it. Thanks. So we're on to decisions required. Jan, you have the first one.
Yes. So first question which was discussed in the issue was if we are going to copy over the legacy epic internal ID to the work item internal ID. My personal opinion is that it would be nice to do this if we can do it, because it will make our life easier later after the migration is finished, because eventually we will want to remove the legacy epic API and basically the epics table. But we will still need to maintain the existing epic links which are stored in all the nodes and references. So if we can preserve this internal ID, we will not break the existing links and we will not have to maintain this old legacy internal ID, because we will basically have this mapping or copy to the new record. Downside of this, as discussed in the issue, is that until backfilling is done, at least until backfilling is done, or it will not be possible to create any work items in the group. So we will need to wait with work items on group level until at least backfilling is done.
So just for clarification, in this scenario, the work item epic, its IID would be identical to its corresponding legacy epic's IID, correct?
Yes.
And we do that by switching over so that new epics that are created use the global ID logic of the work items table instead of the epics one. Is
Not
that
the
right?
global ID, but the
No.
IID, yes.
The IID, sorry. Yeah.
By using that logic, and when backfilling, copying over the epics IID into the work item or issues IID. But for that, we have to not have any work items at the group level at the moment of backfilling, right? Because that, or override, which is basically the same thing. It's just like.
Vasil, you have a question there? Do you want to verbalize it?
Trying to type it. But copying the IIDs from the epics could generate conflicts, couldn't it? Like if the epic with the IID 1, it's copied for the issues table, and on that issue on that table we already have an issue with the IID 1 for that project. How are we solving this?
Well, yeah, and that is exactly the reason why we cannot allow work items in Yeah, it's not in project, but you mean in group, right? And for exactly that reason, we cannot allow creation of any work items until we backfill legacy epics to work items table.
So a bit of background, Kasia, like epics are only available at the group level, not at the project level. And we don't have issues at the group level or any work items at the group level. So that space is empty, is like not occupied at this moment. So moving from epics to issues at the group level would not generate any conflicts on the IID level because we don't have any just yet.
So, but yeah, just so I understand, sorry. But currently the IID on the issues table, it's unique by project. So you would have to change that.
Well, we already have, it can be by project or namespace, because in like internal IDs table allows both project and namespace. So we're like, we kind of already have that for the issues. And we have some testing issues at the group level that already use that, but we can drop them because they're just testing stuff, and we can move epics to the group level, sync all the IDs, no conflicts, and then start adding any other work items at the group level.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
It seems to me that this is something that is decided. Maybe should move to the. I think the problem we had is like we can create. The block is we can create any work items until the backfilling is done, but is this something allowed? I remember we discussed this somewhere, but I'm not sure if it is this going to be allowed. I'm not sure who to ask, maybe Amanda, because if this is the case, if we are allowed to not create any work items at group level until the backfill is done, so we can move forward with this copy.
That was my understanding. Sorry, that was my understanding, but Gabe, unless I pinged you on an issue asking you if you agreed with that, just to make sure.
I think that's okay. The main driver in the immediate goal for work items at the group level was for epics, and eventually it will be for others, but the first one would be epics.
So I actually have one idea here. I don't think we need the full work items backfilling, but rather the backfilling of the internal IDs table. And by that, I mean, like, all we need to do is populate the internal IDs table. We need to switch the epics model to read from internal IDs as if it is an issue, right? And we backfill that table. So basically, we've already occupied the max count for the IIDs for the epics. And then from now on, we can start adding work items at the group level because they will use an increased counter. The only downside is that for the epics, you'll no longer see potentially you'll no longer see sequential IIDs, but you'd rather skip some IIDs because of the work items that are added afterwards, right? So you'll have whatever the last IID of your epic is, 100, and then next one may not be 101, but maybe 125th if you've already created other work items at that group level. So basically what we need is backfilling the internal IDs table, which should not be too much work, or at least a lot less than backfilling the work items stuff. And then from then on, you can start adding work items at the group level, and you should not be blocked by that.
I think it means not only backfilling, but then also keeping this in sync going forward from now. So anytime you create a record in issues table, you need to bump basically both counters for both tables.
Which both no. So I don't know if you've seen the snippet that I posted for the epics.
Yeah, or you would need to tweak the scope of the internal ID for both epics and for issues.
No, for issues you don't have to. Just for epics, you instead of reading as the usage of epics is epics, it will be issues. with that namespace ID of the epic, right?
Well,
Anyway, that's another technical one. I think we can take
yeah,
it as game, but I think it's
we can
doable.
discuss after it,
Yeah.
outside of the call.
But if we can sync that into the internal IDs table, that should not block work items at the group level anymore with the whole work items backfilling. So that should unblock a lot of the other work.
Yeah, but I would say like the initial work item at the group level that was planned was epics anyway. We didn't have plans for any others before it.
Yes, but that blocks us like testing stuff of the work items or any kind of other work that can be like you cannot even create testing work
Understood.
items in
Well,
time
Yeah.
because
No,
of like you need to keep it clean.
No, not exactly. We plan it to actually use it for testing, but we plan it to delete these testing records before we do backfilling. So yeah, we would still use it for testing.
Okay, I think we can take the rest offline because like the key thing is I think that the product managers like fully understand the implications of what we're doing. And the implications are that we can't have other work items at the group level, including issues, until this particular piece of work is done. And we might find a quicker way to do this. But so long as we have sign off, we have a decision. And I think we can move on. Is that correct, Melissa, Amanda, Gabe? You all are on board with that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. Jan, Alexandru, could you maybe like explore that like separately off the meeting and come back maybe with a response on the issue? Like doesn't have to be next week for this. It could be whenever you figure it out.
Yep, we'll take it offline.
Cool. Jan, you're on C now, I think.
Yeah, so the next point was is related to the previous one, and the question was if we want to allow a creation of work items on group level once the backfilling is done, but still the migration of epics is not finished, because there will still be the phase when we backfill and synchronize the legacy epics with the work items epics, but the migration still need to be finished, that we start using the work items epics as single source of truth. And my question was whether during this phase we want to allow creation of other work items in the group. But from Melissa feedback, my understanding is that it's not so important to allow this because epics are being the reason why we want to allow it on group level. And we could use the Alexandru's workaround he mentioned if we need it, I think. So I think we can move on to next point. And this is more interesting, and especially I need product management feedback. Do we plan to use an exception for removal of epics API in future? Or so if some feature is being removed from the product, there is an exception that in major releases, I understand, we remove the feature and thus we remove it from API. Do we plan, is this possible for epics in some major next release like 18.0 or not? And if yes, what major release would it be?
Yeah, and to remove the REST API, is that the question?
Yeah, mainly, basically, yes. For GraphQL API, I assume we will deprecate it through the typical deprecation process, which is 6 months.
Mhm.
So, but for REST API, there is no such deprecation period. So I wonder if we are going to apply some exception for removal this in future or not.
It was my understanding that we would create like a REST API wrapper that customers could migrate to and then deprecate the existing REST API in 18 if we were able to work towards that. But Melissa, does that sound right to you?
I learned recently
Mhm.
that there is no process to deprecate the REST API. Like there's no official way to do that. So
I-
yeah, I think we should pursue an exception and target 18.0. Because we definitely don't want to keep that endpoint around indefinitely. So Amanda, you and I can work offline on that.
So the expected timeline would be marked as deprecated in 18.0 and remove in 19.0, or
Maybe I need to look at a calendar and also figure out
okay, cool.
what's
Maybe-
possible. But I would
maybe
say
remove-
like
Maybe remove-
calendar wise, like we want to give people like a year probably to transition in case they've built something.
I don't think we have any examples of removing REST API, so I'm not sure we will be able to do that, but
Yeah, I was curious if it's possible. Our documentation says that in exceptions, like some feature is being removed, then it might be possible to use this exception of removal this. So I was curious if this is the plan and if it's possible.
The difficult argument to make, in my opinion, because the user experience would be that like the strategy that we're taking around this whole thing is a seamless migration. You barely even need to know that your epics are now work items. You just get, new functionality, and we're deliberately not doing the whole this is not epics anymore, it's a new thing. So I think like the argument might be difficult to make that we should get rid of the old, or not the old, the existing epics API.
So you would rather expect, yeah. So do you rather see us to support it basically indefinitely, like in future, without the plan of applying the exception for this?
I would love to say, I don't know if to say yes or no, but I would love to say that we could make an exception. I think that there's possibly an argument where you have things like areas of the REST API that probably aren't that well used. Like, for example, I don't know how many people are using the API to update their Epic boards, if that's even possible. And you could argue like if we're removing Epic boards and we're going to have work item boards, that is a feature change. But for people who are using the API to list epics, which I know gets a fair amount of traffic, even if we do get an exception, I think we'll have to be quite careful about how we do that. But I suppose another question I have is like, if we're taking the strategy of like gradual removal of features on the epic object and delegating those features to the work item, and we're doing that over time, then won't most of the fields work transparently through the API anyway? Like labels, right? So at some point we'll sync labels over to the work item object and delegate instead of storing them on the epic itself. I know we don't actually store it in the epic, but like, in principle. So by the time we're like nearly done, like we only have an epic object left that has an ID and an IID, and everything else is delegated to the work item. So won't the APIs just kind of work transparently?
Yes, that is the plan, but we will still need to maintain these endpoints. And yeah, so I was curious, what is the plan with these? But you are right that in the end, it should be just a proxy to this work item epic.
yeah, it kind of adds a lot of duplicate work as well. Like the legacy API will need to now be up to par with the work item API because you are adding so many more features to the actual work item epic that is being worked with in the UI and so on and so forth. So like the expectation is through the API, you should have access to the same features and so on and so forth. So then you need to bump up the legacy API to the same parity
No,
at some point.
No, yeah, that's my concern. Like, I wouldn't want to add any of the new features to Legacy API. And I'm sure we would get a lot of requests to add all the features. So that would be my motivation for deprecating it. That it's like a clear expectation of what's where. But we can figure out if that's even possible and go from there.
There is a API vision working group. Did we bring these concerns to that group? Maybe they can help us to define the future of those APIs.
Yeah, so before I got switched to the AI group, I was working on figuring out how to solve the REST API for work items. And the most promising part was to use a wrapper on top of our GraphQL. So far, there was basically consensus or agreement in the API working group that approach might work. I had a POC for this, but next step will be to basically create a blueprint and get an agreement that we want to go this way. And even this will not assure the bump to V5 version. So using this wrapper doesn't assure you bumping to V5.
Yeah, maybe this is like a deeper offline discussion, but if we're planning to deprecate the GraphQL endpoints for epics, if we went this wrapper approach, then essentially the REST epic endpoints would be deprecated. I think there's like inconsistency.
Yeah,
But anyway, we can figure this out.
I think you're only allowed to deprecate GraphQL endpoints if there's a suitable alternative. So the work items API would have to do everything that the current Epic's GraphQL API does before we would even be allowed to deprecate. And then you have to wait 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, we would do that anyway, right? Just because we want to give good alternatives.
Yeah, cool. So we have 10 minutes left technically, so I'm going to skip the next section because I think like it was my question and I think we can do it all offline or async. So Alexander, you raised the point, like, is this a good place for even discussing something so technical? I think you're right. So let's skip on down to Amanda. You have under issues specific discussion, you have the first item.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so the work for widget rollup, so this is on the child widget of the work item. There's a rollup that counts the number of records as well as the weight of the records. So it's really the weight that's the big stopper right now. We haven't landed on a methodology for summing that weight of all children. And there's active UXR going on to identify what users want. How do they expect that to behave? It's close to finishing, but it may tell us something that there's a divergent experience, in which case, if that happens, there's going to be another round of UXR that's going to be needed. And since we're going to invest in this because we want to know the right way to handle this, I'm wondering if we can talk about a plan B situation in case that second round of UXR comes back and a much bigger investment is needed. Meaning that a proposal could be that we launch with parity of what we have today, which on Epics does not include tasks and just simply counts the number of items and the weight of the descendant issues only. And then later we could implement the ideal state that we identify through UXR. So I'm not suggesting that we have to do that right now, but I'm wondering if we should spend a little bit of time identifying what the cost would be and the path might be. Because in 3 milestones, if we come back and have results from UXR and find out we don't have time to implement that, we can be shovel ready with a plan B. That makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So yeah, I think the question is then, if that is the plan B, what is the effort? What is the technical effort involved in doing that, in adding exceptions to the hierarchy widget data? And Mario, maybe you're the one that can best answer that, since you've been working on the hierarchy stuff lately.
And I just want to be clear, I don't want to invest in the plan B at the moment and too much time thinking about it. I just want to have it ready in case we, after UXR comes back, if we're not able to implement that ideal state, we have something ready to go.
All right. So just to answer the question, Donald, it was that, at the moment of investigating the whole hierarchy count, it was just brought up that, we would have to implement this exception mechanism opposite to just counting the hierarchy, right? Which sounds more generic. And at the moment, I think that the decision was that if there is not a strong argument to actually do exceptions on the count, we can just go ahead with this MVC and not do exceptions. But if this is important, to handle exceptions on types, that's definitely something we can do. If we need to do that, that's something we need to figure out how would we configure on something like that, but definitely something we can do if necessary. So perhaps maybe until this is figured out, we can just not implement this. Not sure if, this is something we can postpone a little bit for an implementation until we are sure what and how we want to implement it. Not sure if that's an alternative. There are other things we can work on the meantime, I think. Not sure.
Yeah, so essentially, we can probably say, as long as we have an answer with, say, a milestone prior to the Epics migration being done and in front of customers, like, we can hold off on implementing Plan B up until a milestone before we want to go to GA.
Okay, so you would probably only need a milestone to implement Plan B, because my fear is that the ideal state could cost us several milestones to implement if there's a divergent experience. And if we find that out, the milestone before we go live, there won't be enough time to implement that.
I was gonna say, I personally don't think this roll-up widget would be something big enough to warrant like blocking releasing epics as work items overall. That's not a feature that I've heard people say is like critical in their workflow or super valuable, or you know what I mean? Like, that's not something that comes up generally. So I would also say, as part of research, we should kind of like investigate how people are using it, if it's really just more noise on the screen or something that's super valuable.
So then I guess the question would be, could we go forward with the migration to GA without having any weight rollups?
Yeah,
I think yes.
So my only concern with that, I agree, because I have also been hearing from customers that the value of the rollups are really at the first epic parent, and anything above the first epic parent, it becomes noise. So I agree with almost keeping it off the page might be a better solution. but that would break kind of our rule that we can only go live with Epic parity. And so I would just want to make sure that like UX would be okay with that.
I think that we don't need to
Maybe
over optimize right
Okay.
now because go for it, Jackie.
Now, Amanda, she had talked to Nick Brandt about that option.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
You did you talk to Nick Brandt about the option of going live without the weight roll-ups, without parity?
No, because I've always kind of focused on making sure we had at least parity. This just came up just now, but he and I have talked about the fact that the weight roll up is not valuable beyond the first parent. We've definitely talked about that. Gabe, what were you gonna say?
I was just saying I don't think we need to like overthink it right now. I think that there's going to be we'll try to figure out an MVC from the research Nick Leonard's doing right now that will work. And like if there is an MVC that doesn't require like basically we would alienate one camp of people who would want the divergent solution that we could then follow up with later. But I think that we'll be able to figure something out well before we're ready to migrate. So I'm not worried about right now, and I think we can. But just sort of going back to, I'd rather figure it out than do the whole exceptions thing, just because like that breaks the whole idea of like not having things hard coded to specific types, which will like make everything a lot harder, and we'll have to like unwind it later. So I say we just like put this in the icebox, and I'll stay on top of it, and make sure that we like either do plan B if we have to, or we make sure we have a viable MVC that we can ship that everyone agrees with.
Just a note on that, Gabe. There is a way that we can implement exceptions without hard coding it, just by using the IDs in the database. Just a note. So that wouldn't be like a very bad thing, but definitely better not to implement it if we're going to change it.
Where are we at in
We
the
can move
agenda?
my question. I was gonna say we can move my question over to like a retro, because my question is really kind of about like, was this of the process working, or is this an example of something we might want to change process? So I'm to like a retro thread or something like that.
Cool. Then we probably have time for one more topic at the most. And we have 3 remaining items. So Donald, we have Deepika's questions, if you want to pick from those, or you have a topic, an item yourself.
Let's go, Jackie. If you want to do yours, we can skip the other 2, or the other 2 can be done sync or not sync, async.
My last question there.
Yeah.
See, yeah. So I wanted to see any issue or any document yet where we're like tracking UX concerns that would be a result of any migration decisions. So, you know, for instance, if we need to map out any user experience to communicate to users in the app, what's going to be happening? Do we have an issue yet? I think I had talked to Melissa about this, and it's going to be product planning that would handle this. So yes, it's a question for you, Amanda.
Yeah, I don't have any UX concerns issue. I have like a migration, let me find it. I have a migration kind of plan, which I can add that to.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can add it.
And then we could just like communicate with somebody representing engineering just to make sure we're clear on whatever engineering decisions, if there's some user impact and we understand what that is.
Yeah, I think it's good from my perspective, like to have that there, just because as we make these decisions, that we want to make sure like we're keeping the customer in mind, right? And yeah, just thinking about what it's going to be like for them, like the REST API decision earlier is classic example. I mean, that's, in my opinion, all about user experience.
I mean, ideally, obviously, customers would like experience very little knowledge of change. But I think that it will be hard for it to be completely invisible for them.
We'll have to make trade-offs, I think, and some of the trade-offs are going to be low impact for the customer, but massive in terms of the risk it removes and the complexity it removes. And others will simply not be an option. Like, I mean, yeah, there are certain features obviously we can't live without, for example. So it would be good to have somewhere to discuss that.
Cool. Yep, that was it for me.
Awesome, we're at time, but I have not been excellent at capturing the decisions and the follow-up actions. So if you have one from this meeting, please could you add it to the sections 4 and 5? I'll try and go back through the agenda and capture everything, every decision that was made. But if you see something missing, please put it in there and we'll follow up on it next week. Thanks for coming.
Bye.